there are plenty of those as it is. People who say, God tells me to tell you what to do. And that's slavery.
Incidentally, you make this point yourself, don't you, about this infinite regression of creators. And in fact, Aristotle concluded that the logic of all of this would necessitate 47 or 55 gods.
Yes.
What's the mathematics?
I have no idea. There's a lot about Aristotle I don't understand. And some of it's in that song that
yes.
from Woolloomooloo?
Well, I think it was actually the University of Woolloomooloo. Yes.
Woolloomooloo, so I knew I was pronouncing it. Yeah,
yes.
Yes.
Aristotle was a bugger for the
Aristotle,
bottle.
yeah, Plato, yes. Never mind. John Stuart Mill, of his own free will, on half a pint of shandy, got spectacularly ill. But Plato, they say, could stick it away. Half a crate of whiskey every day. And of course Aristotle was a bugger for the bottle. Thomas Hobbes was a slave to his dram, and René Descartes was pissed as a fart. I drink, therefore I am.
Okay. If my wife was...
How the hell did that happen?
Yeah, I don't really know.
Yes, Socrates himself is particularly missed. Lovely little thinker, but bugger when he's pissed.
There's something about the raising of the wrist.
There's nothing Nietzsche couldn't teach you about the raising of the wrist.
Yes, okay. Let's get
Manuel
serious.
Kant was a real pissant. Very seldom stable. Martin Heidegger was a boozy beggar. He could think you under the table. David Hume could out-consume. Schopenhauer and Hegel.
Hegel, yes, there you go.
And Wittgenstein was a boozy swine who was just as sloshed as Schlegel. I think that's all they wrote.
As you can see, Christopher's widely read. Okay, fast forward to today. Acutely aware that they will never be able to answer some of these big questions about existence, some scientists have come up with the idea of quantum cosmology. And it seems that, and I think you almost alluded to this yourself, that quantum physics almost has a theological dimension now. Could this become, in fact, the new religion?
Well, I think that there are signs of, I think that, look, to back up, I think that the temptation to worship has to be admitted as being innate in us. I mean, there are very few people who are born without it. I think I may be one of them, but I mean, I don't say I'm completely immune to superstition either. I mean, I'm a primate. I think for that reason, I don't think religion is eradicable, or that it would be desirable if it could be eradicated. I think it needs to be, if you like, domesticated, brought under control. That very quotation from Marx that I used in his critique of Hegel shows that he understands that this is a product of the human soul, if you wish, or human personality. It's not just the result of unresolved material contradictions. Thus, it's been folly for any communist regime to try and put it down, to put that shortly. So yes, it's possible that people could become worshippers of physics, or the quantum. Just as in my view, and it's beginning to worry me, in some of the green and environmental movements, there's a feeling that we've brought punishment upon ourselves. You know, that we've sinned, and that there are people who look upon, I haven't been into this Gaia stuff very much, but who look upon the planet as in some sense something that needs to be propitiated and placated. I can hear some echoes of this in some apparently modern and reason-based and evidence-based movements. Yep. So yeah, it's always there, and you always have to be on the lookout for it.
I'm actually talking about physicians, well, not physicians, but the quantum physicians, I suppose you would call them cosmologists. Put very simply, the idea is that things can just happen spontaneously. Particles can pop into existence without warning and disappear without warning, and the corollary of that, according to Paul Davies, among others, is that the entire universe could have just popped into existence.
I'm reading this book about the quantum now and about Heisenberg. There was this discovery that it seems that a particle doesn't so much pop into existence, but it can be there and then be there, reassembled, with no one knowing where it was in between, which is like a poltergeist or something. except that it's not, because there aren't any poltergeists and you can't measure them, whereas with this, there's a chance. I haven't got very far with the book yet, but there's a chance of it yielding to analysis. It's certainly the only method we have had any luck with in the past.
And one potential...
And of course, we don't like to think of ourselves as random. It's not in us to feel that we're just an accident, any more than we can picture our own extinction, let alone the extinction of our whole species. But it has to be faced. It's no good saying, because that thought is depressing, we should banish it in favor of something more uplifting. Because that means you get all the bad news anyway, and in the meantime you've been fooling yourself.
Let's go to someone you talked about during your talk, but we didn't go into any detail, Stephen Jay Gould and his work on fossils in the so-called Burgess Shale deep in the Canadian Rockies, which actually helped to establish the origins of human life, pinning it back onto this tiny little creature called the Pikaia gracilens. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the Burgess Shale is this, some of you will, I'm sure, already know this, but it's a place in the Canadian Rockies where essentially half of a mountain fell away. So you get a side view, a cross-section of a mountain looked at from the side. Very useful, because you see all these stems and branches of life and the fossil record. You're not drilling down for it, you're surveying it like that. Scientists go there in a big way. It's the best example we have. And what's very striking about it is how many of the branches and sprigs go nowhere. They just taper off. Gould, in fact, says it's silly to think of evolution as a tree. It's much more useful to think of it as a big bush. It goes in all directions. A tree seems to have a sense of upward phototropic movement. This is more like a bush that's growing sideways and so on. So the question is, suppose you could scan all this picture onto a tape, mixing the metaphor slightly, rewind that tape back to the beginning, play it again. There's absolutely no guarantee that it would come out the same way. In fact, the likelihood that it would come out the same way is almost nothing. Very sobering thought. And in the succession of evolutions that led to ourselves, there's one moment where there's a tiny creature called a Pikaia gracilens, gracilens simply meaning graceful, meaning bendy, which has the beginnings of a vertebrae system, of a spinal column. And that's the creature from which we got the idea of having a spine, and built upon it. If it had been left out of the mix, there's no Homo sapiens either, and it's sort of that big. And if the tape was replayed, it might not show up in the right time and place.
From which you conclude randomness and no plan.
Well, certainly, I would certainly say no plan. Or, because I can't quite say that, because no one can be that certain, no plan that isn't fantastically wasteful, capricious, arbitrary, and run by a designer who half the time doesn't know what he's doing, a mad scientist, in other words, and possibly a very nasty one. I mean, in other words, certainly you can't say it's a benign plan, no. No, you could not say this was a Heavenly Father plan. The implications of there being a planner of that plan are much more frightening than the implications of it being random.
We're running towards the end, but I want to quickly go to Stephen Jay Gould's own philosophy, because you mentioned it earlier. He was not an atheist, in spite of understanding this. He was an agnostic who took the view that science and religion ask different questions about life. And he reached this conclusion: if we keep science and religion apart, neither one can oppress the other. But in fact, he wanted to, and he said this: I believe with all my heart in a respectful, even loving concordat between science and religion. Now, you admire him a lot.
Yeah, I do. I think he was one of the great educators of all time, and that's why it cost me a lot of pain to say why I disagree with him, and at such length. When he was a boy, he was a Marxist, and I think he overcompensated for not being one by trying to be more friendly towards religion than it deserves. and well, for the reasons I've already given, I don't think it's true that there can be a real coexistence. I think they're constantly trying to patrol the same frontier, and in the case of religion, to cross it in inappropriate ways. I mean, why should it be that in the United States, great country of science and technology and reason, there's this unceasing attempt to have nonsense taught in the schools with government money? They won't quit. They've been beaten back. They keep coming back for more. They try and smuggle it through customs. It used to be when they were strong enough, they would ban the teaching of Darwin. Until the 20s, they could do that in some places. Now they can't do that. The next demand was for equal time, sounds fair, for what they then called creation science. Nice try. That was exposed as a fraud. Then they said secular humanism is a religion.